morning. My name is Jared Hammond, and I am the chair of the worship arts team here at East Shore Unitarian Universalist Church in Kirtland, Ohio. Thank you all for joining us here today, under the beacon and on Facebook Live. Whether you are a member or friend of our congregation, whether you join us every Sunday or only occasionally, whether we've known you for decades or you've just stumbled upon us for the first time this morning, whether you are with us here under the beacon or you join us from your own sacred space, you are welcome here. Acknowledging your skin color, ancestry, and expressions of gender, your net worth, your political opinions, and the people you love, the long and winding journey that brought you here this morning, you are welcome. May this be a time of reflection and renewal, a time to live into our mission to love, revere, discover, and connect. I invite you now to rise as you are willing and able and join us in singing our opening hymn, number 293 in the gray hymnal, O Star of Truth. I was out kind of late last night. I went out to the Beachland Ballroom, if any of you have ever heard of that music venue, because a friend of mine was playing with a band that he's a part of called Rubik's Groove, and they were celebrating the release of their first EP. It was a great show. Had a lot of fun. But it made me wonder, as I stood among all of those people, so much closer to so many strangers than I have been in such a very long time, what kind of risk is this? Is this one of the ones that's worth it? Or is this one of those unnecessary risks? It's very hard to tell the difference in the moment. It's much easier to tell once the consequences roll in, and the benefits. As we work towards leaving the past several months behind us and moving toward whatever the future may hold, we're going to have to weigh all of those risks, making sure that we are taking the ones that are necessary, that propel us forward into the future, and don't leave us stuck where we've always been, while we also continue to be cautious of those unnecessary ones and the consequences that they bring with them. We light our chalice this morning with the words of Reverend Florence Caplow. Thank you, Dorothy, for lighting the chalice for us. we kindle this flame, honoring the doorways in our souls, the windows through which we gaze at one another, the balconies where we catch glimpses of sky, the thresholds we stand on this morning, wondering, hoping, fearing, dreaming. And if I may add, I guess, wishing that the wick was a little higher so that it would actually work. We're just gonna. I took a risk. I was hoping it would work. It didn't work. That's okay, because the consequences, totally fine. Could I ask someone to grab the book from the pedestal out in the narthex? Oh, excellent. Thank you. There's nothing in it. So this book, which sits out in the narthex on a pedestal, is where we place our joys and cares when we have something specific in our minds or on our hearts that we would like to share with everyone else. Nothing in the book this morning, but I'm sure we all have things going on in our lives, milestones that we're achieving, and concerns that weigh heavily upon us. So if you have had the opportunity to grab a stone from the bowl at the top of the aisle, I welcome you to hold on to that now. If you have not, please feel free to grab one at this time. I ask you to hold on to it and to think of all of those joys and cares for you. Those unspoken milestones and concerns that are a part of your life at this moment. The things personal to you and all of the people around you. As we share a moment of silence to honor those milestones and concerns. And when I sound the singing bowl, I will invite you to join me in placing these stones in the bowl at the center of our worship space below the beacon. Now sharing a prayer from Marta M. Flanagan. Holy One, known by many names, Creator, Sustainer, Redeemer, you make your presence known to us in the sunshine of winter, in the dance of the flame, and in the lingering embrace of a trusted one. Fill us this day with your warmth, your power, your strength. Help us to see our lives with a freshness born of the Spirit. Lift up the blessings, the loved ones, the ones we treasure for simply being themselves, the ones we laugh with, the ones who teach us to trust ourselves. Hold close the ones who are ill this day, those who feel the discouragement of the body. Stand by those who know their time is limited. Fill them and us with courage, with peace. Gracious One, release us from our burdens. We bring the memories of the past, times when we fell short, times when we were hurt. We have fear, worries of what will be and how we will make do. We get carried away with small concerns, the daily issues that press upon us. Help us to let go. Free us from inner bonds. We look at ourselves, the advantages we have been given, the opportunities we have seized. Fill us, O God, with a sense of gratitude for the gifts that are ours, knowledge, skills, and hard-won insights. Nudge us to give back, to reach out, sharing our talents, our riches, and ourselves with those who are discouraged, disheartened, or simply unaware, with the young, the dispossessed, the elderly. Gracious God, grab our attention, seize us with the brightness of the day, with the miracles of life itself, that we might be filled with new passion, new resolve, heeding your quiet call to take the next step. Amen.
Good morning. I'm Mary Bender, and I'm a member of the Worship Arts team. And I would like to explain the cover of your order of service this morning. A few weeks ago, I was reading a novel by Catherine Chidgey. It's about the administrator of the Buchenwald work camp during World War II. And the author had researched some of the interviews that were done in conjunction with the war crimes trials after the war. So she had a lot of really personal information about some of the people that participated in the work camps and the other death camps. And so she based her novel on a lot of that research. So it's quite interesting, and it was a little bit different than a lot of what I have read before about World War II, because it was more nuanced. The title of the book was Remote Sympathy. And on page 82, I ran into an interesting situation. The wife of the Buchenwald administrator had a 4-year-old son, and someone had given him a Nazi cap with a visor, and the visor had some of the Nazi symbols on it. One of them was this death head, which is a stylized skull and crossbones that was on the cap on the visor, and the little boy was quite fascinated by this. This is for the people at home so they can see what we're looking at. The little boy was very fascinated by the skull and crossbones, and he kept looking at it, and he kept bringing up right up by his face and peering at it and looking right into the eye holes. And he kept doing that over and over, and the mother was looking at him doing that and wondering, what does he see when he does that? What does he see when he brings that right up close? So she took the cap and she started looking at it up close. And then her conclusion was that Despite the closeness of the object, it blurred out the focus, and it did not look like the thing that it was. So it occurred to me, how often in life do we get too close to something, or are we too close to something to see what it really is? And I also started asking myself, what would she have seen if in her situation as the war was breaking out, what would she have seen if she could have stepped back into her life and taken a bird's eye view of her situation? Would she have seen death? Would she have seen anti-Semitism? Would she have seen the tragedy of war? The inhumanity of the leaders? No, she wouldn't have seen those if she was too close. And as you read this novel, you can see that a whole lot of people were way too close. But then I thought, well, how often are we too close to see things as they really are? What if we could distance ourselves a little bit and view things from a distance? Would we see death? Would we see the anti-Semitism that still exists? What about racism? Would we see the disease that's heading our way? Would we see injustice? What would we have seen when the Japanese were interned during World War II in concentration camps in our very own country? Would we have thought anything of that? Would we see the inhumanity of our political leaders? Would we see climate change? Would we see the true nature of our personal relationships? So that's why I put the skull and crossbones on your cover this morning. This reading is unattributed and the author is unknown, so it's part of Judy Bagley-Bonner's sermon. She introduced her sermon with this reading. In a mother's womb were two babies. One asked the other, "Do you believe in life after delivery?"
Oh, why, of course. There has to be something after delivery. Maybe we are here to prepare ourselves for what we will be later.
Nonsense. There's no life after delivery. What would that life be?
I don't know, but there would be more light than here. Maybe we will walk with our legs and eat from our mouths.
That is absurd. Walking is impossible. And eat with our mouths? That's ridiculous. The umbilical cord supplies nutrition. Life after delivery cannot exist, if for no other reason than the umbilical cord is too short.
Well, I think there is just might be something, and maybe it's different than it is here, and we just can't understand it yet.
No one has ever come back from there. No, delivery is the end of life, and after delivery, there is nothing at all.
I don't think so. I believe we will finally see Mother, and she will take care of us.
Mother? You believe in a mother? Where is she now?
She's all around us. It is in her that we live. Without her, there would not be this world.
I don't see her, so I must conclude that she doesn't exist.
Sometimes when we are totally quiet, can't you almost hear her? Can't you almost feel her touch and sense that she loves you? I believe that after delivery, we might come to see her clearly, and maybe then we will come to understand what this is all about.
Thanks, Dorothy. Many of you will remember Judy Bagley-Bonner. She served for a year in 2013 while we were searching for a full-time or part-time minister. And we were very lucky to have found her for our interim period of time because she was actually a Unitarian or a United Church of Christ minister. And but she was interested in us, and she was interested in our theology and how closely related it is to the UCC theology. But she went out of her way to, I think, accommodate some of her more Christian beliefs to our less Christian beliefs. But I think she was able to strike a good balance. So after my mother died, I was going through her things, and I found a little collection of Judy's sermons that my mom had kept. She really liked Judy. And so I contacted Judy and got permission to use her sermons that she gave in 2013. So this sermon is really Judy Bagley-Bonner speaking to you from a remote distance in Florida. This particular sermon was the third of a three-part series on progressive theology, and particularly her own version of progressive Christian theology, which apparently a number of congregants here had asked her to give a sermon on. I want to say at the outset that in this sermon, I'm really going off the grid of progressive theology per se. And you will be getting, what you're getting today is pretty much just plain old me. There is a saying, I can't remember the source, that goes something like this. It's no good to mix all the ingredients in a fabulous new recipe unless you finally actually cook it on your own stove. So today's sermon is me sharing with you the dish I get once I cook it on my own stove. Because for me, theology is ultimately pointless unless it really makes a difference in my daily life. While to some extent I can appreciate theology as an intellectual pursuit, I like the world of ideas as much as the next nerd after all. But for me, it's more than that. If we can go back to the kitchen metaphor, for me it's like mixing up a recipe in a blender. You add the various ingredients a little bit at a time, and they get sucked down into the central vortex, where they become an integrated, processed part of the whole. If that doesn't happen, if the theology doesn't get thoroughly integrated, it all seems pointless. So I begin with affirming that underlying, awe-inspiring spirit of life, which I believe is an essential part of this world. I think of it as an underlying water table, underground stream, which nourishes and hydrates all the various forms of life that tap into it. We see life emerge from that spirit in even the most unlikely places, like where the cypress tree emerges from a wall of solid rock, or where humans survive horrible abuse and suffering and go on to survive and maybe even flourish. Or where we see broken relationships reconciled, or acceptance finally comes for something that you had been mightily resisting, or systems that are improved by those who patiently endure in the work of justice and finally reach a tipping point, such as when apartheid fell, or DOMA was overturned, or perhaps Belfast becomes a city in which it's reasonably safe to walk. I believe there is a spirit which ultimately will not be suppressed. And even though there are whole domains at any given moment where we don't see it yet, still it's on the move and it breaks the surface. sometimes where we least expect it, and had almost abandoned hope. I believe we are at our best, our most whole and alive and effective, when our roots are tapped into that spirit, when we work with it rather than resist it. Can we work with the silent resistance? I had a friend in Minneapolis who was a progressive Jesuit priest, and he was always in trouble with the hierarchy. One of his daily spiritual practices was to take a moment to stand on his porch as he was leaving his home each morning. He would lick one finger and lift it in the air in a symbol of discerning which way the wind was blowing. Then he would mentally and spiritually set the intention of himself to align himself with the wind's direction, and then run down the steps into his day. Not a bad picture of the spiritual life, I think. I believe we are at our best when we seek to discern where the broader flow of life and wholeness and healing may be flowing, and then try to work with it and try to go in that direction. I guess I'm talking about being open to spiritual guidance. Traditional Christian theology calls it discerning the guidance of the Holy Spirit. I would be more comfortable talking about it as being intuitively open to wherever the universe may be nudging me. Maybe it's as simple and basic as the Serenity Prayer, accepting the things we cannot change and changing the things we can, after first trying to figure out the difference. If that is all we ever do, to try to live from the Serenity Prayer and go with the spiritual flow, just that much, then that is way more than most people do. And it will, I believe, be a deeply rooted spiritual life. But as a Christian Universalist, for myself, I would add a little more. I believe Jesus was one whose roots were consistently immersed into his spiritual source, and that because of that, he was able to reach out in a moment-by-moment act of love. For me, the point is not to worship Jesus, not to locate some magical properties in him, but to go forth and do likewise, to use him as an example for how to live, to keep my roots as much as possible immersed in spirit and my arms reaching out in love. Jesus didn't do it for me. He modeled it, and I likewise need to do that for myself. It's not about becoming like Jesus. It's about becoming the fullest, most whole, most alive, most love-based version of myself as possible, growing into my own wholeness and into my place in the universe, my place in the interconnected web. And for me, that's what it comes down to. I believe it is the underlying purpose of life for each of us to grow into our wholeness and into our own place in the interconnected web. I believe it takes at least a lifetime, and the process never stops. In fact, aging and dying and death are a big part of it, sort of the senior project, the final thesis, the big push at the end of the degree. I believe the whole purpose of life is to learn and grow spiritually, to keep evolving. I believe that life is the school and love is the lesson. And it takes at least a lifetime and probably more. And now comes the part where some of you will really think I'm crazy. I'm very open to the possibility that the gradual spiritual evolution that I'm talking about doesn't just occur in this lifetime as bookended by our birth and our death. I don't know the particulars of where we might have come from or where we might be going. I have a strong gut instinct that Wordsworth might have been right when he said, "Not in utter nakedness do we come, but trailing clouds of glory from God who is our home." Likewise, I think Holmes was sensing it when he wrote Chambered Nautilus and used the idea of outgrown shells left behind so that a broader, more vast shell could be made, each shell revealing a larger, more expansive world to that little creature involved. Or like that baby in the womb, who in the quiet sensed that mother was all around and there would be more to come. C.S. Lewis, perhaps best known for his Chronicles of Narnia, also wrote a compelling short book on the whole idea entitled The Great Divorce. This is another book that I recommend, but with full disclosure that while there's plenty of meat, there's also plenty of bones, and you're going to have to do some filleting. In his book, we meet a number of individuals who have just died. We are told something of their backstories, and we see that during their lifetimes they made choices that unbeknownst to them were moving them along a path, either emerging wholeness and evolution, or a kind of shrinkage of spirit. After death, they each got to choose whether to stay on the path they were on or not. Then the rest of the book follows those who decide to continue the journey up the mountain toward the land of beauty and clarity. As they make that journey, they find they still have plenty of work to do. They meet people from life with whom they have unresolved issues, and they need to face their own part. Some of them still cannot do that, and their progress stops. They stay where they are, or even end up going back down to the grisly gray city where people keep moving farther and farther apart because they can't get along with their neighbors. Others do their work and find themselves going up and on as they ascend. They notice that their new bodies are changing. They are becoming more luminescent and strong, emitting a higher energy frequency. They are developing the bodies of spiritual athletes, you might say, as they ascend further into what they later come to know as deep heaven, the realm where each soul experiences reconciliation and understanding of what the entire journey has been about. There's no outside God sending anyone anywhere. They have all made their own decisions at each small choice point. Basically, that's what I believe, that spiritual growth may well have started before we got here and will continue after we move along, whether it is in multiple lifetimes, such as reincarnation, or just one long, slow process extending beyond what we know as either end. Who knows? Although I will share with you one story from when our son was about 2 years old. He suddenly said to his father and I, "When I was an old man, I was a ship's captain." His dad and I looked at each other wide-eyed in that moment. Still, I obviously don't know the particulars, nor do I ultimately know that any of this is certain. If it isn't, it's not a deal breaker. If after we die there is nothing other than ourselves going back into matter as part of the universe, that's okay by me too. But I cannot help but hunch at a deep and visceral level that there is more, and that we just do not yet have the range of perception to discern it. That there may be other dimensions unknown to us, but existing right on top of this one. Sort of like different TV channels that we don't know that because we haven't changed the channel yet. Basically, what I'm saying is that I believe that somehow consciousness continues, that spiritual growth is the purpose of life and will continue for as long as it needs to until somehow everybody and everything is part of some kind of joyful reconciliation, some kind of cosmic resolution. As to understanding the particulars, I couldn't begin to guess. But even if it turns out to be dead wrong, that belief gives me a strong sense of purpose and allows me to believe that even the awful things that happen, while not premeditated by God, can at least ultimately become useful in working towards some kind of greater evolution as we proceed in the great cosmic process. This belief does not mean that I live any less fully now, in fact more so, because this is all I have to work on right now. And living from my spiritual source and reaching out in love in each present moment is all I'm ever called to do, and if I'm not practicing that now, I'm missing the boat. So there you have it, the universe according to me. My spouse calls it Judaism. I want to thank those of you who pushed me to do this, because I haven't revisited these things in a systematic way since my ordination paper back in 1986. And so now, I want to lob the ball back at you. Taking the time to think through and write down your own theological and spiritual beliefs is a helpful process. You require your kids to do it in the Coming of Age program. Maybe it's time to think about another coming of age. So to all of you, and especially those of you who pushed me to do this, what I'm really saying is, tag, you are it. And now let there be an offering to be shared with this liberal religious community. I don't know who's doing the offering today. There's some people. They're everywhere. Thank you for your gifts, not just your monetary gifts, but also your gifts of your presence here today, or your presence at home on the internet, or your support from time to time as you see fit. All of our cooperation and our participation makes this liberal church a community that we can all enjoy. The Board of Trustees wants to thank each of you also, and promises that they will use your contributions for the betterment of this religious community. Thank you. And now please rise if you are willing and able to sing the closing hymn, number 86, Blessed Spirit of My Life.
Let me know
We receive fragments of holiness, glimpses of eternity, brief moments of insight. Let us gather them up for the precious gifts that they are, and renewed by their grace, move boldly into the unknown. Jared, do you have some announcements before that?
Yes, indeed, some announcements before we get to our bond of union. So, this afternoon, our Sisters Keepers will meet on Zoom at 2:30. Their prayer circle will begin 6:15 a.m. on Wednesday, as it always does, both on Facebook Live and here at the church in the chapel at the end of the Faith Development Wing. Beverages and banter will occur on Thursday. That's on Zoom at 10 a.m. Not seeing another one for this week, so keep an eye out for emails in case if there is another one. We'll get there. Church workday is on Saturday, the 7th of August. That begins at 8 a.m. And yes, so Halcyon would like you to know that this upcoming Wednesday is First Wednesday night, and dinner will be eggplant parmesan, pasta, and salad. Worship will be the power of music. So please sign up in the narthex so that Halcyon can purchase and make an accurate amount of yummy. And I believe that's it as far as announcements go. So I invite you all to stand and join hands as you feel comfortable doing so, and join in our bond of union.
Hands, Unitarian, Universalist fellowship, pledging ourselves to an individual religious freedom which transcends all creeds, not to think alike, but to journey together.
Bye, Internet friends.